welcome. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot of awesome viewpoints here, so I don't want to waste any time getting started. So I'll just share some housekeeping really quick first. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send out the recording later today or early tomorrow. So feel free to take notes, but we'll also make sure that you get the follow-up. And I'll just kick off by introducing myself. I'm Becky Trowbridge. I'm the digital marketing manager here at eComEngine. I've been here for about 7.5 years, and I really love working in the Amazon space and getting to know all the ins and outs of things like supply chain, nerd out over logistics, even though that's not really my, I write about it, but that's not what I'm doing day to day. So I'm excited to have some awesome expertise on here today from Movley and Cahoot and Tactical Logistics Solutions and Viably. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sajag from Movley to introduce himself.
Hi guys, excuse me. Hi everybody, I'm Sajag. I'm the founder of Movley. We do quality control inspections for sellers, typically manufacturing overseas. And a little bit about me. Before I founded Movley, I used to be a seller myself, grew my brand to about 2 million a year in revenue. And for a brief period of time, even lived in Shenzhen, basically just going to hundreds of factories and kind of learning the ins and outs of the process.
Awesome. And to me, so I think, sorry about that, Becky. I was like, mute, unmute, in true Liz fashion. Hey, everyone. I'm Liz Beavers. I am product marketing manager and partnerships manager over at Viably. We are a digital banking solution and working capital provider for e-commerce sellers. So really looking to provide that all-in-one financial tool to help sellers be able to grow and scale sustainably, but really excited to be here and join this panel of experts and talk about all these good things that are going to be impactful to you all.
My name is Manish Chowdhary, founder and CEO of Cahoot. Cahoot is one of the largest order fulfillment networks in the US with over 100 plus fulfillment centers. So we help our clients with full service logistics, bringing in inventory from overseas or domestically, storing that inventory, dripping it into FBA, as well as providing D2C fulfillment, including the most demanding programs like Seller Fulfill Prime. So I know there's a lot of talk in the seller community right now with all the Amazon fees. Every seller needs to adapt and make changes to their operations. So I'm looking forward to sharing what our clients are doing at Cahoot, and hopefully you get great value out of this webinar.
And hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Diaz. I do marketing and partnerships here at Tactical. We're pretty similar to Cahoot, I guess. So we'll also handle the entire supply chain from overseas with freight forwarding, 3PL warehousing, domestic trucking, and all the in-betweens. I call it all the boring stuff, the behind-the-scenes stuff. But we have fun doing it over here. So yeah, that's what we do.
Thank you all for being here today. So, whoops. Kick off with a question for the group. Well, I guess starting at the beginning, we really need to think about inspections and quality control and kind of why do we care about quality control? You know, here at eComEngine, one of our tools is Feedback 5. We're always concerned with getting those good reviews, quality reviews. And we know that really starts with having a great product. We see a lot of compliance issues. Amazon's constantly, issuing recalls. They've made a lot of that a lot more transparent recently, but obviously you want to do what you can to mitigate before your product gets to the customers. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that a lot of sellers, right, they go to their suppliers and they have good suppliers that they work with, right? If you don't have good suppliers, then you're already in a pretty bad spot, right? You want to start with really good suppliers to begin with. But what I think a lot of sellers kind of forget is that your manufacturer is a business. And just like any other business, it's always constantly evolving, it's constantly changing. So like, here's some ways that like suppliers change, and your supplier will change in multiple ways every quarter, I would say. But here's some like common changes that happen with suppliers. Their production workforce changes, especially after Chinese New Year. They usually turn over a large percentage of their production workforce. Their management workforce turns over. They might switch raw material suppliers. They might change management processes. They might have infrastructural changes, like they might be changing the machines on the production line or recalibrating them and things like that. They might be changing the production process and the number of production lines. They might have new trainings for workers. And something really interesting is, when you go to a factory, you'll see on the production line, they'll have like a sheet over every step in the production process with instructions on how that step needs to be run for the worker that's sitting there. And so they might change those trainings and maybe the training processes there. And they might also change their quality program and quality personnel. So those kind of things change all the time. And it's really important that, if whether, the number of inspections is a little bit more, it's a little bit, it comes down to like risk tolerance and things like that. But when it comes down to just doing quality control, doing inspections, it's important to kind of keep on top of that. At the bare minimum, just like, every few purchase orders and things like that, just to kind of keep your suppliers on their toes and aiming for quality. So, it sets and reinforces a clear cadence, like, hey, this is what is acceptable in terms of quality. Here's what's not. It gives you kind of a defect rate on an ongoing basis, so you can monitor how your supplier is changing. You can't really monitor something that you're not, actually controlling for. And that lowers your risk. So ultimately, you don't end up getting an order that has a problem or an issue, and then you end up getting it into Amazon. And we've heard this happen a lot. Like we had a seller that was working with their supplier for 7 years, and on their 7th year ended up with a bad batch of products because the supplier changed the materials on their products. And as a result, it was a one SKU brand mainly, and they were doing over 10 million a year on that SKU. And that entire product got shut down. The listing got suspended. The order defect rate went through the roof, and ended up getting their account suspended. And it was a super competitive category. It was travel bags. It's very hard to rank for that. So as a result of that, even if they were able to unsuspend the account, they would have basically lost all their rankings permanently, and they would not have been able to compete. Not to mention their listing was permanently damaged with a lot of negative reviews. So that kind of stuff, like that's the worst case scenario. But even like small things like, well, my co-founder, actually, he had his products mislabeled by the manufacturer at one point. And if those mislabeled units, the UPCs weren't scannable because they were put inside the poly bag instead of outside the poly bag, very small mistake. But even then, when it got to Amazon, it would have resulted in like a huge spike in the inbound performance rate, and it would have literally suspended his ability to send units inbound to Amazon. So those kind of things are always happening, and they're changing, and especially with Amazon now like doubling down and tripling down on compliance and other testing aspects and things like that. Amazon is just going to get tougher and tougher on these kind of things, and it's really the best that's going to win. And it's important to have that emphasis on quality control as a result of that.
Yeah, it's essential. Thank you for sharing. I did want to mention really quickly, like I said, we have a great panel of experts here. If you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and as it makes sense, I'll interject or we'll get to them at the end. So don't be shy. We're here for you. It's your hour. Use it how you want. And then moving on from that, I'll just say there are a lot of issues right now that are causing rising supply chain costs. Pricing is very challenging right now with, we see all these fee changes. Shipments are getting more expensive, materials are getting more expensive. So what can you do to optimize those costs? What are the issues that you're seeing at Viably, Liz, related to supply chain, and what can sellers do about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, just as was mentioned earlier, some of the biggest considerations that we're hearing from folks who are coming and looking for working capital opportunities, some of the biggest sticking points that they're having from a supply chain standpoint range from the initial supplier that they're working with. And again, what their team looks like, what their warehousing needs are doing, what the cost is to actually ship the goods. So you have literally every component of logistics. Inflation is hitting each point of it. So just like Sajag was saying, it's so critical to have those key relationships with your suppliers to help mitigate some of the pains that are naturally coming along with what's happening in the supply chain. So I think just again, kind of where we worked with folks is they're trying to establish better relationships with their suppliers. And that's kind of where working capital has come into play from what we've understood with the clients that we've been working with, is we want to be able to give them better buying power. And when they have better buying power, they can navigate some of the hiccups that are coming along with these challenges from a supply chain standpoint. So you're starting with the origin and making sure that that's going to be seamless from there. So I'd say that's one of the biggest pieces. We've also seen a lot of folks from kind of what's happening with rising costs really evaluate if they want to invest in their own warehouse. So that's also been a consideration that's come up from some folks. And sorry if you guys can hear the train in the background. And we're right by a railroad anyway. So we've actually had one client who we work with, and he's made a really significant investment and has still been able to scale very sustainably by having his own warehouse, kind of mitigating some of the costs that have come up. So that's given him a bit more control over what's been taking place. I know that that solution isn't for everybody, but that's been another consideration that's been compelling in terms of how folks have been dealing with navigating some of those rising costs. But again, a lot of it boils down to how much capital do you have as you're looking at other solutions, so that you can, again, kind of navigate these waters as these issues arise.
I think I would add, so a lot of the routes used to be a lot more affordable, as we saw, but some people are seeing really, really high prices, especially when you're routing towards the East Coast. So if you have the possibility of choosing a supplier, maybe that doesn't have to go through the East Coast, anywhere in the West is best, for sure. The Panama Canal is drying up for some reason. It's not raining season.
Yes, I was reading about that too, Cindy. Yeah.
But if you have to go through the Panama Canal, chances are your prices are going to be spiked for that reason. But thankfully, I just read that raining season is going to be coming soon in May to Panama. So hopefully the water and the flows are going correctly so that things can go smoother in that direction. So that's one thing to consider as well. And while you're doing that, just shopping rates in general is always very important, not just always sticking to the same ones. And even if you have a trusted freight forwarder, on the side, always be like able to be flexible and just look, and you might find something better when you're least expect it. So definitely.
If I may add, I think it's all about agility and flexibility, and making fixed cost capital investments like warehouse should be taken very, very seriously. It is not for everyone. In fact, if you don't know where your demand patterns are, where your inventory is going to land, and let's say you build a warehouse or own or rent or 5-year lease, and Baltimore port closes down, and all of a sudden, so these are things that happen very, very frequently. So we should typically at Cahoot, we advise clients against making such large capital investments, because you're going to tie up your very precious cash in things that are not movable. And you're looking for flexibility, you're looking for agility. And that's Cahoot network is very large, so we are able to rapidly adapt, whether there's some clients that need to store inventory longer versus dripping it into Amazon faster. It is going to really boil down to how fast can you adapt. Is your supply chain flexible? Is it agile? So something to be very mindful of as you move in 2024.
I saw Joanne raised her hand. I don't know. There's a question here. Well, if there is, we'll get to it when we come back. Yes, I think flexibility is super important. And one of the things that we were talking about before this call was the FBA inbound placement fee and the low inventory fee. We're seeing a lot of frustration with a lot of these things, and Amazon obviously is too. They announced last week that they're actually offering a credit for the low inventory fees that are incurred during the month of April. So the fee is still going to be in place, but it's kind of just like a trial run for April, I guess, as everyone figures out how this new system works. So now you're looking at, basically you need to keep between 29 and 100 days of inventory at FBA, no more, no less, because you'll have fees if you have aging inventory, which we may talk about a little bit later. And you'll also have fees if you don't have enough inventory. So really looking for that sweet spot of ensuring that you can keep up with demand. You're able to fill those orders. If you're winning the buy box and you're really getting a lot of orders coming in, you're able to get them out the door quickly. So along with that, I just wanted to talk and open it up to all of you. I think there's a lot with these fees. We've seen a lot of changes this year, and it's complicated for everyone, obviously, as they're trying to adjust and build those agile supply chain processes. But what are you seeing, especially with the inbound placement fee? I know a lot of sellers have been experimenting. So those of you who are in warehouses, you know, what seems to be working? What's still complicated? What questions do people have?
I can go first if you so if you look at the stack of Amazon fees, from 2019 onwards, prior to the pandemic, Amazon has been subsidizing warehousing and fulfillment for sellers because they had AWS, which was a cash cow. It was part of their vision of building out this very large scale global warehouse network. So as much as the sellers say that Amazon has been getting more and more expensive, but the reality is for many items, small and light items, Amazon is still very competitive. That's just because the shock comes from the increase in fees and coming frequently. And I think that is where in 2019, largely speaking, there were three big fees in FBA. FBA fulfillment fee, which is on a per SKU basis. You had the storage fee, and then you had the long-term storage, short-term and long-term. Now, if you look at 2024, in addition to those fees, you have the low inventory level fee. You have new changes to removal and disposal fees. You have changes now, new fees, storage utilization surcharge, aged inventory surcharge, and the inbound placement fees. So the fees are racking up, and from a high level, from a 30,000-foot view, what can you do? In order to deal and cope with inbound placement fee, you have a couple of options. You could certainly look at Amazon Seller Fulfill Prime, which, Becky, we can talk in more detail a little bit later into the presentation, the webinar, or you could use AWD, which is Amazon Warehousing and Distribution. And of course, you can use the traditional 3PLs to drip inventory. AWD is not great if you're not sending large amounts of inventory. So if you're only sending a few cases, AWD just will not work. SFP also requires a certain amount of scale for it to work. With respect to FBA fulfillment fees, remeasure and resize where appropriate. If you can go down a size tier, if the product warrants it, and that ties in nicely with what Sajag in terms of quality control. If you're going to make a change, you also need to make sure your quality stays with it. With respect to monthly storage fees, again, you need to look carefully at how many days of inventory do you have in addition to resizing, because that can help you both on the storage fee side as well as the FBA fulfillment fees. Aged inventory, if you've got stuff that's sitting there, it's only going to get worse. We're just going to keep accruing more fees. You got to identify those SKUs, sell down, retire, dispose, whatever you got to do. It's not going to move itself, the inventory, if it's not selling. The peak storage fees, of course, you don't want to head into Q4 with lots of inventory and then you stock up FBA again, which will mean that you would incur a significant amount of peak storage fees in Q4. I know Q4 sounds it's a long time away, but in the world of supply chain, it's not that far out. And the low inventory level fee, which I know Becky alluded to, that Amazon will credit you the fees back for April, but it's not going away. So you got to, again, track the days of sales and how many days of inventory you have, and you got to monitor that carefully. So I'm going to pass this over to whoever else wants to go, but that's a high level.
I think I can add two things that we've been seeing here with a lot of our clients that have been working, or just in general, but for the low inventory level fee. So something that kind of Manish touched on earlier about being agile and having that flexibility throughout your supply chain would be super important in this part as well, because specifically our CLO, one thing that he hears a lot or that he sees successful sellers doing with products that are pretty much year-round consistent, where it's not like a seasonal item or that kind of thing. It's a 2-2-2-2 rule. So 2 months in production, 2 months on the way overseas, 2 months in a 3PL or somewhere local, and then 2 months in FBA. So it's kind of always having parts moving in each part of your supply chain, so that no matter what, you're probably not going to be stocking out as often, or maybe not at all. That's being proactive about that. So yeah, that's one good one there for the low inventory. And then as far as the inbound placement fee, one thing, our CLO actually also had a conversation with 9yard. So a lot of software that had been used before for kind of mitigating around that issue is having to be either, I don't know if it's a lot of them are working or not, but with 9yard, for instance, we did have a chat, and they're looking at, they're calling it adaptive shipping mode that you can use with them. So instead of the abandoning shipment as they used to do, you don't do that anymore. So what they're doing is that the product that you have the most SKUs for, or sorry, the most units for, is going into the bigger shipment. So now that they divided into 5 locations, right? So the biggest one goes into one location, and then the rest, instead of abandoning the shipment, what they're doing is just sending the lower unit SKUs into those 4 locations. And then you're using SPD for those, and then possibly third-party carrier for the bigger load. So you're not abandoning, but the majority is going to whatever location is closest to where your inventory is sitting now. So like at your 3PL. And that way your trucking fees aren't as expensive, and you're not sending multiple truckloads all over the country. It's just the biggest load takes the hit, and then the rest are hopefully not as pricey if you're choosing to not use any Amazon services. But that's one thing that kind of recently came up, still pending on like the longevity of how long that will work for, but that's for now. I can share.
I was going to say too, kind of on the low inventory fee, on our side at Viably, again, we deal with a lot of finances and kind of getting your cash flow in order and knowing all those ins and outs. So something that we've also heard a lot of our clients chatting about is, with that low inventory fee, it also brings up considerations about your ad spend, because you're already going to be impacted by what's happening with your products in transit and all those other nuances that come with that. But it's also key to be monitoring where your inventory is sitting, so that you're not putting a lot of ad spend towards those products that have the potential to stock out or are going to be low. So advising clients, again, to really monitoring what's happening from a marketing and PPC standpoint, so that you're not losing out on money in that avenue if you're going to get charged more with a low inventory fee. So that's where we're always advising the folks that we work with who have been bringing this to our attention. Viably also has some growth tools. So just being really strategic in terms of tracking what have those stock out periods been, how are things, again, kind of pacing from a trajectory standpoint, so that you can keep in mind, I know I'm spending this on all of my logistics and the elements of my supply chain, but I also have ancillary costs that are going to come with that. So I think that's another big consideration that we've been hearing from folks too, with those low inventory fees.
I mean, I think seller fulfill prime is something that every seller ought to be looking at, because Amazon may have gone a bit too far this time with all their fees. I mean, imagine if you have less than 28 days of inventory, you get charged a fee. If you have too much inventory, you get charged a fee. You get charged for placing the inventory, you get charged even 3 times as much for removing the inventory. Basically, and a listing that you don't control, sales that you don't control, you don't own the customer. So you're operating in an environment that you absolutely have no control over, and most sellers are operating on very slim margins. So, and then you're trying to create similar fulfillment infrastructure for each one of the marketplaces. Walmart has Walmart fulfillment services. Now, most sellers don't have an army of people and analytics and PhDs working behind the scenes to help them figure it out. And even if they did, it's impossible. It's impossible to figure out how much you're going to sell, when are you going to run out of stock, and how to balance your ad spend. So if you're dealing anything in oversized category, large, bulky, I think Seller Fulfill Prime is an excellent choice. If you come over to Kahoot.ai, we're happy to do the analysis. It's complimentary. It doesn't cost you anything. We can let you know if the economics work in favor of you when it comes to Seller Fulfill Prime. you get access to the same Prime badge, the same shopper, far more control, and you don't have to live in this constant fear of trying to manage to 28 days. And the best part is, once you have that infrastructure set up, you can now turn on that 1 day, 2 day delivery for every sales channel, whether you're selling on Shopify, whether you're selling on Walmart or eBay or what have you. Diversification is important, and I think every seller needs to have a alternative to Amazon FBA. And luckily, Amazon did reopen this program in October. Happy to talk more. We have tons of content, resources at Kahoot.ai about Seller Fulfilled Prime. And again, it's on a case-by-case basis. We can run the numbers and see if it works for you or not.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's an awesome program if it works for you. Yeah, we've had a lot of interest in that over the years. And we do have a couple of questions that have come in. So I'm just going to jump in here with Hal is asking, what are your thoughts for how to manage these Amazon fees for a seasonal product? I think that's the $1 million question, Hal.
Well, if it's an oversized item, go with Seller Fulfilled Prime. I think especially since you don't know how much you're going to sell and what's going to be left over, because otherwise they will just accumulate storage fees or you'll end up with removal. So it depends on the product. And if it is in the oversized category, large, check out Seller Fulfilled Prime.
Anyone else want to chime in on seasonal? Cindy, did you have anything? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
I would say, kind of still touching on what I said before, like it's more about the being proactive aspect of it for me. That's all I can probably chime in. But given like if you did have more product in more parts of your supply chain, then you can quickly access them versus having to, ship something through air freight or do the more expensive trucking routes if something's in higher demand. And then as far as the off seasons, I'm not sure how to chime in too much on that part, but at least for when things are in high demand, having things already in the US will prevent a lot of issues with having to just overpay when you shouldn't have to.
Great. And then Rach is saying, when shipping a small order, is it best to send separate shipments to East, Central, and West locations instead of one shipment to one location? If one location is selected, are they sending it across the USA or just distributing it out to that section of the country? We are too small to send large shipments at this time. We generally send 40 to 60 pickleball paddles a month.
Cindy, if you want to go on that,
I'll let you go first and see if I can.
if you're sending small parcel, it's not going to make a huge difference, I don't think. These are all SPD, small parcel delivery. It's better to send them individually because it will be received faster. And again, I don't think it will make a huge difference on your UPS bill unless you're sending very large amounts of inventory. There is a little bit of strategic advantage on the West Coast because the way how Amazon Fulfillment Center network is designed, they obviously they do charge more on the West Coast placement because it's just a little bit more expensive for them. So depending on where your demand is coming from, what the Amazon plan says, that could be a way to optimize. I mean, optimization is a sequence of many, many small things that you do to achieve the overall results. But Cindy, if you want to add more to that.
I think it's pretty similar answer. That's what we've seen when a lot of clients come to us with smaller shipments. We just end up recommending small partial or LTL that makes sense. But for the most part, that's how it's going to work. So pretty much what Manish said.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot with the inbound placement fee. I think Amazon, theoretically, if it works well for your product, the idea is that you could mitigate those fees or possibly not have any fees. But what I'm seeing from a lot of sellers is that they're still seeing inbound placement fees regardless of size of shipment and all of that. It's very complex. It's challenging. There's a lot of math involved. Which is why we have wonderful people like you to do the math.
Well, and I'm going to throw out kind of a random question on this. And Manish, you might be able to highlight this a little bit kind of based on your expertise, but I know something that's come up, and it's a question that I can't say that I can necessarily speak to, but it might tag on to what was just recently posed by Rach, Becky, is about in Amazon Seller Central with your inbound settings and clicking like the Amazon optimize or like that partial shipments. I guess with these different fees, what's a good recommendation in terms of those inbound settings that sellers might consider that could help save them in terms of what's happening? And again, if this isn't relevant or valid, I've heard it come up a couple of times and I figured it was worth throwing out to the group for this, but if it's totally off topic, then we can keep rolling.
I mean, if you can find any hack that can get you a strategic advantage, why not go for it? I think there are some tools that are still able to make things work, perhaps not for how long. That is questionable. I think from a planning perspective, yes, from tactical execution, you can look into avoiding some of these fees. However, you must start planning because Amazon will begin to close those gaps and holes, so to speak. So Andy Jassy has been a strong proponent, meaning if you look at Amazon profits and if you watch their earnings call, they've just been growing up and up. And it is a highly concerted effort that Andy Jassy has made from going from the national fulfillment centers to regional fulfillment centers that he announced, and to improve Amazon's profitability. Essentially, there is a drive in Amazon to make each business unit profitable. So previously, Amazon was subsidizing, as I shared with you, and now the initiative is to make each retail should be profitable on its own accord. AWS is obviously mega profitable. And so that's what they're trying to do. And as of 2024, they are looking to become profitable in the FBA side by all the fees that come from FBA, not stealing fees from advertising to make up for FBA deficit. So long term, I think the fees will stay. But in the short term, yes, there might be some tools that can give you an advantage, which you should take advantage of.
That's a really interesting note there as well, because that's literally the how to fight off an antitrust lawsuit playbook, right? So if they're trying to make every unit profitable on their own, they're probably preparing to A, get split up, or B, also try to avoid getting split up.
And speaking of supply chain, sellers are getting hammered left, right, and center. We all know UPS has come out, FedEx has come out. They have clearly said, their CEO, Carol Tomé, has come out and said, yes, there is weak demand. Right now, the retail is weak. So we're going to make up our profits by increasing our fees wherever we can. And that is exactly just last week, UPS and FedEx both came out and announced new increases, what they call delivery area surcharge, if you're doing fulfillment directly FBM. So downtown San Francisco now can cost you $3 to $6 more to deliver a package. And it is clearly an effort by companies to try and improve their profitability, because if you can't make it up in larger sales volume, if you do have the pricing power, which is what UPS and FedEx have done. So it's a really testing time for sellers, because your supply chain, your cost of raw materials and your supplier costs are higher than the freight, which, yes, we saw a drop in freight cost, ocean freight, and then now they're beginning to climb back up. Oil is now at $90 a barrel, which is a macro indicator. And then now carriers, UPS, FedEx, USPS, they've been gradually raising their fees. So it is a tough environment for sellers to operate in.
So we have a few related questions that have come in. So one is there any requirement for seller fulfilled Prime? And I'm actually going to send an article that Cahoot wrote for our blog that I think really summarizes the advantages of seller fulfilled Prime. And like Manish mentioned, they have a ton of resources on their site. I just want to be aware that we have quite a few questions still, so we could get into that for quite a while. So, and Manish might address that in just a minute. And then we have another question about the shipping structure. If we don't have units on the west side of the country, will Prime show up for those customers on the west side, or will it just take longer to get to them?
I'm sorry, Becky, what was the last question again?
Sure. With the new shipping structure, if we don't have units on the west side of the country, will Prime show up for those customers on the west side, or will it just take longer to get to them? And I think this kind of gets into why seller fulfilled Prime would make sense for some sellers,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Largely speaking, I think there is a myth that sellers have that just because you send stuff to FBA, it will be available on Prime for every shopper in every zip code. That is not how Amazon operates internally. Amazon is also optimizing for its own profitability. That means if the item is in transit, yes, sometimes occasionally you will see a longer delivery time frame. You can purchase the item as a buyer. However, Amazon will tell you it won't be delivered in 1 or 2 days. The promised delivery time will be much longer. But even worse is in many cases, since you don't control your placement of inventory because Amazon dictates the plan, you cannot be assured that every zip code in America is actually seeing your product and it's available under the Prime badge. So that's the other advantage of Seller Fulfilled Prime, because with Seller Fulfilled Prime, you are placing your inventory with that national coverage. So this is hard to test because unless you have a proxy server that emulates somebody in Wichita, Kansas, looking from a web browser in New York cannot get you that answer.
Just to add though, like I think overall, right, like Amazon is going to ship your inventory across the country. So even if you ship it in the East Coast, if it does get to like major distribution centers because Amazon, spreads it out, then they will see Prime, even if you ship it only to the East Coast.
Right. And I think also related, one of the things we wanted to talk about today was shipping delays. And I know that's been, it was a big issue, and then it was less of an issue. And now we're seeing things like you mentioned, the Panama Canal, the Baltimore Bridge. Things happen all the time. So how can sellers be agile in the shipping process when there are delays and avoid going out of stock at FBA?
I think I would suggest, let's pretend that the delay is already occurring and you're already running low, and it's maybe everything's in the US already, but you just, the last mile. A big one that a lot of sellers don't always know about, which I preach it all the time. We preach it all the time at Tactical, but instead of using Amazon partnered carriers for that last mile, use third-party carriers, because Amazon partner carriers, they love to go even slower. So if you're already in the delay and you don't want to delay even more by using Amazon specifically, they'll drop containers off at the final destination, but it won't get offloaded until weeks. We've seen as bad as 4 weeks, a month, or even more. It's absolutely crazy. So that will only worsen the situation. So given that, when you're using a third-party carrier like us, for instance, we are not allowed to leave our containers or any of the trucks, nothing at the final destination. We have to offload. So it's called live unloads. So all third-party carriers are required to do live unloads, which means your stuff is offloaded from the trucks within the 24 hours. They have to. And that means that your product is now sellable. It's going to be in transit, finish the last little distribution piece of it at Amazon, but it's going to be sellable. And that's like the most important part. You're not out of stock. You're still in action. So that's one tip I can give.
The other tip I would recommend is I think every seller should have FBM capabilities as a backup. You can have multiple offers on the same listing, an FBA offer and an FBM offer. I think in the yesteryears where several 3PLs serve purely as an FBA prep and forwarding services, sellers need to now also have D2C fulfillment capabilities. And that gives you a backup. This way, you don't have to turn off sales. Yes, if you had Seller Fulfilled Prime, that's great. But Seller Fulfilled Prime, again, is not for everyone. But FBM can certainly be used for everyone. So at least you have the listing on and it's not out of stock.
I would add another point there too. I think that from the supplier side, what we've seen work really well is kind of similar to something Liz was mentioning earlier, which is like buying power. So, there was usually this like huge thing about like, let's do just in time inventory and we're just going to have shipments coming in all the time and right on the spot, and hopefully we're good, right? And in a world operating in perfection, that's great, right? If there's no delays, there's no, Baltimore shipping port issues, and there's no Panama Canal issues, then that's fine. But that is not something that is the real world. And there's manufacturing delays, there's shipping delays, there's a lot of delays in the process that can happen. So a little bit of a contrarian opinion is I'm actually an advocate for lowering the inventory turn cycle to something that's a little bit more achievable. So instead of doing a shipment, let's say coming in every month or every 2 months, maybe consider a shipment coming in every quarter. And that shipment has all your inventory for the quarter. And maybe you're queuing up another inventory, another order in China or wherever else you're manufacturing. You can have that inventory ready and stored in the warehouse in China or anywhere ready to go. So larger orders to your manufacturers, having those orders ready to go in some warehouse in China, and then having those shipped periodically, potentially smaller number of shipments, but larger shipments to basically offset that. And that is financeable. So if you don't have cash flow, you can go ahead and get financing for that. And sometimes that's worthwhile because you've reduced your costs because you're buying orders in a lot higher volume. So your suppliers are able to give you better pricing. And then B, you're also able to take into account lower freight costs. So because you're not doing LTL, say, for example, or you're shipping more pallets of LTL. And then you're also able to avoid a lot of these new fees like the low inventory fee, because you have inventory ready to go that can be shipped into Amazon on a dime's notice, and you're ready to go. So that's something that might be worthwhile considering, is obtaining financing, maybe spending a little bit more in your inventory to put yourself in that position, and just doing a little bit of a basic analysis like, hey, how much is my financing cost? How much is my mass production cost? And you might notice that, hey, if I produce 2,000 units instead of 1,000 units for my order, or 10,000 units instead of 5,000 units, and so on, you could very easily see a 5 to 10% decrease in your COGS, which can more than make up for the cost of financing.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, I might be skipping a little bit ahead, Becky, in terms of some of the other tips that we were planning to share later about working with suppliers, but just kind of echoing what Sajag was saying, because that's honestly like a lot of what we've been hearing, and we've advised to folks, especially like on a wholesaler side of things, and how they should be working with their suppliers that they've teamed up with. But I also think in terms of upping the quantity that you're buying, and if you're not buying in such rapid succession, so if you're doing, just like you suggested, once a quarter, really large buy, I think, again, kind of talking with your supplier about the trends you're seeing in the performance of your product, it's really all about establishing trust. So that's where, kind of from a Viably side, what we've seen is, with additional working capital in situations like this, as you're navigating some of those supply chain challenges, it's just like creating an aspect of advocacy and trust with the supplier that you're working with, so that you don't hit those ruts. Again, I know that there are things that are fully out of our control, but I do think one of the recommendations that we've been making with a lot of the folks we've been working with is, with greater capital comes greater responsibility, greater buying power, greater advocacy that you can have in terms of negotiating with your supplier, and the chances of them fulfilling future orders and working with you a bit more closely to make it work for you are going to be greater too. So a lot of different things to consider there.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And let's just get into it. So we did want to talk about, what are best practices for working with suppliers? What tips do you all have? What have you seen work?
I mean, I'll give you a non-supply chain tip, which is ultimately, I think Sajak touched on it. They are a business, and you have to always understand that it has to be a win-win proposition. Sometimes sellers think that if you can squeeze everything out of the supplier, maybe they're going through a period where they want to accept that, but then they're not going to give it your best, give you their best. So I think it's very important to treat those suppliers as partners, have an open lines of communication. I personally believe in the old school way of sometimes going out and meeting with them and really building a relationship. If we treat these relationships as transactional, the minute they have an opportunity, they'll treat it the same exact way. So I think it's very important to understand the non-monetary aspects and to ensure that it's a win-win partnership.
Yeah, 100%. Just to double down on that, right? Like if your suppliers are treated transactionally, then it's not going to be the best relationship with them. This is something we see all the time, right? You negotiate your costs down with your suppliers so much, you've like thinned out their margin, and now all of a sudden the supplier gets a bunch of more orders from other customers. They start pushing your order back. Next thing you know, your order is taking, set 30 days. Now it's 45 days. Now it's 60 days. And now your supplier is just pushing it back and you don't know what's going on. And it's often because of the price, and they may not tell you that directly. But I can add a few other points as far as like working with suppliers as well. I think kind of what I was alluding to earlier, I believe is very useful as well to just kind of focus into that. So when it gets down into the manufacturing run, I know Liz was talking a little bit about wholesale, and wholesale, it's more, I imagine they already have the inventory ready to go. So it's more so like it's more of a relationship aspect building for buying power. But when you get into the actual manufacturing process, the way that these production lines are structured is that marginally the unit cost goes down the more units you are able to purchase and operate one production line. So there is a cost to setting up a production line. So putting in people, getting them into the operation, training them on all the different steps, setting up the production line to produce a specific type of product, that takes X amount of time. And that has to be done regardless of whether you're doing 1,000 units or 10,000 units. Now, how long they keep that production line running and those workers, those QC personnel, and et cetera, working on that process, that's up to the number of units being produced. So if you take that fixed cost and you divide it over more units, your cost is going to start to go down. And your supplier also typically will order raw materials at high volume as well. So another like tip here, which is, I guess, a little bit different from just in general practice of working with suppliers, some of that as well, is a lot of customers, a lot of sellers actually don't split up their packaging orders from their mass production orders. And that's another great way to optimize and lower your COGS pretty substantially. So packaging is one of the best examples of this because it's very machine made. So you're having machines that are coming in and slicing your cutouts, cutting them in the right ways, painting them and adding the artwork and things like that. So programming those machines and getting them to do a small run of 1,000 or 2,000 units is very expensive. So another way, if you haven't considered it already, even if you've not ordered, let's say your order is 5,000 units, you can order 20,000 units of packaging from your packaging supplier and have that on stock in your supplier's warehouse for future orders. And that will actually be very cost effective. You might get those 5,000 units for $1 a piece. You might get those 20,000 units for like 50 cents a piece. So the marginal cost goes down quite a bit because of those optimizations. So, and that also goes with your suppliers. Your suppliers are also buying their raw materials at a higher quantity if you're able to give them a higher order. So if you have that type of relationship with your supplier and you start talking to them about the different quantities, splitting up the components, and understanding the different processes that go into the manufacturing process, now you can start to understand where are your levers that you can pull to work with your supplier and help them get to a point that you're able to lower your COGS and become more efficient.
And the last bit is just dealing with compliance. It's a lot cheaper to deal with any kind of packaging compliance, barcoding, even kitting, light kitting, assembly, all of that stuff overseas than to bring it into the US, unload, and then do all of that here. So if you already know that you plan on selling this in a certain way, you want to keep that. Imagine the listing and even selling those products before you start ordering stuff. So you almost have to work your way backwards. I think Sajag mentioned putting the barcode outside the poly bag versus inside the poly bag. Imagine if that inventory shows up, Cindy, at your warehouse, you have to undo every one of those poly bags and then redo them. And because now Amazon doesn't want the barcode inside and outside because that will be non-compliant. So just these little things are so important to pay attention to because it's about the 1,000 paper cuts. That's how we die on Amazon.
That's so true. And to add on to that, like this is more tactical as far as the manufacturing process. But if you have like packaging, going back to that example, and you're ordering 20,000 units in advance, you don't know which unit is going to be in there. Let's say you have a lot of different colors and a lot of different variations and maybe a lot of different products, but you share packaging. What we've seen work really well, and this is something that we practice as well, is you could actually just kind of keep your barcode sticker and just have one sticker that changes depending on the product. So you can have 5 different variations, just print out different barcode stickers and make sure it's stuck on the right product. But then you do run into those kind of problems, like you were saying, when it comes down to mislabeled products, right? And just making sure the product labeling is good. Making sure the product is, manufactured right and it's packed properly and the shipping cartons have the right labels and things like that. When you start seeing even small mistakes on that, that typically ends up causing a lot of issues. We've seen some really interesting stats on when it comes to some of the issues that suppliers typically run into when it gets into quality compliance. So if you look into your Amazon return reasons, that's actually a great place to just look into and just kind of understand why are customers returning your products, because now Amazon is putting a high return rate badge on certain products. And once you get one of those badges, it's very hard to get rid of and your sales basically tank. And that can happen because of whatever reasons. And mislabeled products is actually a very common issue we see leading to some of those, especially with products with a lot of variation. So say, for example, you have 4 different colors. It's very easy for somebody on the workforce at the, low level workforce in your factory to stick the red on the blue and the blue on the green and whatever. And now all of a sudden Amazon's like, all right, we got the right inventory, but then your customers are returning the product saying, I ordered a red, I got a green. And they put it in as a return. You don't notice it. It's not a bad review because Amazon will be like, oh, this is like something on the fulfillment experience, da 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 da. And even with the 3PL that you're not working, I'm sure, Manish, you've probably seen this where, customers will ship and then they'll come after the 3PL and they're like, hey, you guys shipped the wrong products. And it's actually just something the supplier messed up. So we've seen like on average about 60% of returns are due to preventable quality issues, whether it's like workmanship, mislabeled products, things like that. Around 31% of negative reviews are due to just preventable quality issues. And another thing that we've noticed is that suppliers are typically, you're losing around 0.5% of revenue on average, retail brands, just from suppliers miscounting your products. So saying, hey, yeah, we shipped you 1,000 units, but there's only 980 or 950 in the shipment because they missed a few units here and there for whatever reason. So those are also interesting issues.
One last point, which is relevant on ships in product packaging. That's the program by Amazon, SIPP. If you're selling larger items, you've got to really transition over to ships in product packaging. It's going to save you money considerably because you can avoid an entire large box. And it's also going to be favored on Amazon because there's a separate filter for that. It is in line with Amazon's environmental pledge and so on. So definitely look into it, especially if you're selling oversized items.
Yeah, that's a big one. And you just have to get like a packaging drop test. I believe you can self-certify as well, depending on the product. But once you get those tests, like if you're selling like a TV, for example, then definitely have that recorded so you can save some money there.
I know we're kind of coming up on time and I want to make sure that we touch on everything that we talked about in the email. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was expanding your supply chain to other platforms. So Manish, you mentioned like Walmart fulfillment. What are some best practices that you all have seen for, we know that most sellers are not just on Amazon, right? Or they're considering expanding to other platforms. So how do you do that effectively without, having issues with your Amazon inventory?
I mean, a lot of sellers that we work with also use Walmart fulfillment services, which is newer. So they do have many limitations, but that's another channel to stay on top of. WFS is still to mature. And then Wayfair, for example, if you're selling on Wayfair, they want you to use their shipping label to ship out inventory. Macy's has different programs for 1P versus 3P. So largely speaking, for omni-channel, multi-channel retailer, having a single infrastructure for shipping works best because you can tap into that for all your channels. So if you had a 3PL network, whether it's Kahoot or Tactical or someone else that has large enough footprint that can support you nationwide, can push inventory to FBA when you need, can send inventory to WFS, but not be limited to that. And on the other extreme, which is Seller Fulfill Prime, which is the most demanding program. So I am a huge proponent of shared infrastructure because that leads to overall cost reduction. It allows sellers to focus their time and energy into sales marketing as opposed to trying to worry about each channel and compliance.
Can I just ask, what about multi-channel fulfillment? Have you all seen success with that? Does it kind of depend on the product or the product size?
So Amazon charges more for multi-channel fulfillment to this day. And second, returns is a big problem, which I know Sajag touched on. With Seller Fulfill Prime, the returns come back to the 3PL where you have a little bit more control, or come back to you, especially if you're selling, expensive items. You don't want Amazon to decide, or some person at Amazon to decide how it should be. Should it be sold back as new? We've seen both sides where people are getting damaged items that are being shipped to new customers, and that causes reputational damage. It leads to bad rankings. And in many cases, these expensive items are being discarded. They're supposedly perfectly fine according to the seller, but they're being classified as damaged. So I think overall, the trend is moving towards having a strong backup to FBA. And so that favors returns as well.
I think I would add, just in general, to keep yourself organized when you are working in obviously fulfilling in multiple channels. When you do partner with 3PL or wherever it is you're going to be storing your items, to have just visibility into your inventory pretty much at all times. So I'm always surprised when sellers come to us and they are very excited about the fact that we have a portal where you can view your live inventory. They're like, what, that exists? And I'm like, yeah, oh my God, what have you been doing before this? And so it's just simple software, things like that. Even just having a partner, for instance, we partner with GoFlow. They have software that can keep track of everything from all of your channels that you're selling on, and then that can link to our portal, for instance. So as long as your APIs are connected between all the softwares you're using, it makes things so much easier than having to have multiple different methods of keeping track of what you're doing and where things are going. So yeah, it's a super important factor. Is just what software are you using, and can you see your inventory at all times?
Yeah, Cindy, I'm actually really glad you said that, because I think one of the pieces of advice that we like to dispense is don't be afraid of what technology can do from an integration standpoint. It was funny, yesterday we were chatting with some folks from the eCom cooperative actually, and we were talking about just general sentiments of what sellers should be embracing. And you guys, sellers, we use a lot of tools. There's so many things that you are responsible for. So just as Cindy was mentioning, to amplify that, go through and find where there are tight integrations that's going to make your lives simpler so that you can reach that operational excellence that you're seeking, especially in terms of what's happening with your inventory stock, what's happening from a logistics standpoint. So yeah, I think that's a really beautiful sentiment to double down on.
And speaking of fast shipping, Walmart is a really greenfield when it comes to 1 day, 2 day delivery, because Walmart doesn't have the kind of infrastructure. So if you have that infrastructure through Seller Fulfill Prime or others, and you can turn on those fast shipping badges on Walmart, all the power that is being a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and certainly try different channels, but quickly figure out which channels are performing. Not all channels are created equal, but don't be locked into just Amazon. Just diversification is a great idea. Move quickly and then pick your channels. Don't try to do 20 channels all at once, because each channel needs its own focus in order to succeed.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of just building a real brand, right? If you build a real brand, and Amazon, I feel like it's moving into algorithmic territory in many ways, where a lot of these brands are just kind of turning into algorithms, right? It's algorithms in terms of how to rank, how to optimize, how to ship into Amazon, how to optimize your fees so you're actually competitive and you have competitive advantages compared to other sellers. And it's like constantly evolving. I think the Amazon game is starting to change and turn into something different. Previously, you could use Amazon as a channel and like build a brand. But I feel like now, if you really want to succeed on Amazon, you have to kind of start thinking about this very algorithmically. So for example, Anchor, right? If you look at Anchor's SKUs, they have thousands and thousands of different SKUs of very similar products that are tailored to individual keywords. Whereas if you look at Anchor, if they were a pure off Amazon brand, they wouldn't have that many SKUs. So I think there's some genuine trade-offs that need to be kind of thought through. Is like, do I want to launch all my products off Amazon? Do I want to have a product line that's maybe just completely, it's on Amazon, but that's my main product line off of Amazon? Those kind of considerations have to be actually looked at, because maybe your strategy has to be adapted if you're trying to sell on Shopify and TikTok Shop, etc., and you want a little bit of a different strategy.
Awesome. Well, I could sit here all day and talk to you all. I love hearing what you all have to say, and I think this has been awesome. I hope that everyone's come away with a lot of actionable insights. I did just quickly want to share our Restock Pro tool is designed to help you manage your FBA inventory. So like we were talking about with that low inventory fee, we're working on some features to help you manage that and to make sure that you're staying in stock and you know when to restock and what to do to manage all those fees. And it also just makes it really easy to reorder, manage your suppliers. We call it like a supplier CRM. You can make notes in there. It's very, very flexible. It actually analyzes over 70 data points to help you decide when to restock, and happy to answer any questions about that if you have them offline. But with that, I will just say thank you all so much for attending today, and I'll be sure to send out the recording soon. We did get some questions about seller fulfilled Prime. I'll share some insights in the recording email, because I think that's just a much bigger topic than we had time for today, but there is a lot of interesting stuff there. And thank you all for attending. We'll see you next time.